Hey, Alabama Aloud listeners. Producer Austin Toy here. We'll be back next Wednesday with a new episode. In the meantime, we wanted to share with you an interview Don did on another Troy Public Radio podcast that you might know, In Focus with Carolyn Hutcheson. Take it away, Carolyn.
From Troy Public Radio, this is In Focus, and I'm Carolyn Hutcheson. Troy Public Radio has announced the launch of Season 2 of the popular Alabama Aloud podcast. Don Noble, podcast host, visits In Focus today with a preview of several of the 9 featured short stories. Don is also host of Alabama Public Television's Bookmark, and he joins us today by Skype from Tuscaloosa. Don Noble, host and narrator of Alabama Aloud, welcome back to Troy Public Radio.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here.
Don, your podcast has taken off. It is one of our most popular podcasts. You're about to launch Season 2.
Yeah, I was astonished. I know that people like to be read to, but as Season 1 went along, we got these odd statistics on the number of different states in the United States where someone had listened to Alabama stories aloud. And then there were even a few countries where somebody downloaded it. And I thought, well, isn't that nice? It was kind of fun.
It launched originally for Season 1 in the summer of 2023. Here we are launching Season 2. Is this sponsored by a grant?
There is a grant from the State Council on the Arts. There's even some underwriting, I understand, from Ernest and Hadley Bookstore.
Because there may be people who might not have tuned in to Alabama Aloud, let's first of all tell them what it is, because you're sort of continuing the tradition of a very popular narrator on public radio, Dick Estelle.
I used to listen to Dick Estelle. I used to have to spend a lot of time in the car commuting, and I listened to Dick Estelle Radio Reader, and he read full-length books, usually nonfiction. So there'd be like a biography of Eisenhower or a history of the War of 1812 or something, and you had to listen. It was broadcast. He would do it in chunks. So in order to keep up, you had to listen. He was a professor, actually, at the University of Michigan. And I understand that Troy Public Radio was one of the last to carry Dick Estelle. But I was a fan, and I thought I'd like to do that. And my original impulse was that. But then after some meetings with Kyle, especially, we decided the way to go was probably single session short story reading. The first season we did 12 or so short stories. Most people, especially outside Alabama, don't have any idea how much literary talent there is in the state. We just have a huge number of fiction writers, novels, and stories. I have in front of me here a potential list for the future of another 20 different names that are worthy. We just have a lot of fiction talent here in the state. We're going to do it. We did 13 or 14 last year. We're going to do another 9 this time.
Give us a preview of Season 2.
The first 2 stories are really topical. The first story is called The Good Thief by Ravi Howard. And Ravi Howard does not write a lot of short stories, but The Good Thief takes place at the prison. It is about capital punishment, which has been in the news in Alabama quite a lot in the last few months. And the second story is by Lee Smith, who did live here in Tuscaloosa for a number of years. And it's set here, and it's called Me and My Baby View the Eclipse. And it is about a man, but he might be gay. People think he is, and people treat him as if he is gay, but he has a secret love life, which is not gay at all, but nobody knows about it. It's comical and wry, and you know how Lee Smith can be. I think you're a fan, too.
I am a big fan of Lee Smith, yes. And Don, it's so interesting because you have people like Truman Capote, you have F. Scott Fitzgerald, you have your lovely wife, Jennifer Horn, who is one of Alabama's former poet laureates.
Absolutely, yes.
Tell us more.
Jennifer put out a book of stories called Tell the World You're a Wildflower, and I've chosen another story by her for this upcoming season. And it is about an elderly lady who against the wishes of her children, decides she's going to live in quite a nice hotel for the rest of her life and use up most of the money. Her children wish that she would not do that she would leave the money to them. The Fitzgerald story takes place in Montgomery, and it's as a result of F. Scott Fitzgerald's experiences in Montgomery when he was stationed there in World War I and courting Zelda. But it's not an Army story. It's called The Jelly Bean, and most people would never know this. I didn't know it. But the Jelly Bean was a kind of a derogatory term for a local small-town man who was a slacker and ne'er-do-well and never did accomplish much. But this Jelly Bean falls in love with a girl above his station. It's a kind of sad story, I guess you might say. The Capote is the famous story, Children on Their Birthdays, and that takes place in Monroeville. And it is about this charismatic young girl comes to town, and all the local boys are crazy for her, and they break up their friendships. They have fistfights. They're all mad for Miss Bobbitt. It's a well-known story, and for people who go to Monroeville, it takes place right in the road outside of where the Harper Lee house was. There's now a Dairy Queen where Harper Lee's house was, but right there in that road is the site of this Capote story.
I don't think people realize, as much as they enjoy this podcast, the intricacies of getting permissions to even do them. How does that work?
Intricacies, boy, that's a nice polite word. The easiest way is if the author is living. Living authors always say yes because they understand this is a kind of publicity. This season, we're even giving them an honorarium. And it moves from there. Equally easy are the stories in the public domain, like the F. Scott Fitzgerald story, The Jelly Bean, because it's just public. But the complications come, the author is deceased, it's uncertain who has the rights. Sometimes people who have the rights are very suspicious or have exalted ideas about what the fee ought to be. But each story really does present a completely different set of problems. Sometimes it's impossible to find out who owns the story. We don't do a story unless we have permission. And there are several deceased Alabama authors where it's uncertain where those rights lie now.
Well, Don, I have to say hats off to you and to Austin Toy and to Kyle Gassett for bringing this to fruition along with the grant that you were talking about. Not only are you serving people across the United States and beyond with this Alabama Aloud podcast, but so many people who are vision impaired, whether they have macular degeneration or they're totally blind, this is their only access to Alabama authors. You have made this possible.
I'm glad of it, and I plan to keep right on doing it.
Well, we are excited because this is the big week for Season 2 of Alabama Aloud. What else do you want to say to your listeners directly?
People have told me that you can listen on your computer, you can listen on your phone. I'm told if you're really clever, you can make your car radio generate Alabama Aloud. I was looking at the stories, and they take place in Monroeville and Mobile and on the Tennessee River in Birmingham and Tuscaloosa. But we have stories by men and women, black and white writers, and from several different decades and all over the state.
Well, it has been great to visit with you today and celebrate the launch of Season 2 of Alabama Aloud. Thank you, Don.
Thank you.
Joining us by Skype from Tuscaloosa was Don Noble, host of Troy Public Radio's popular Alabama Aloud podcast. To tune in to the debut of Season 2, you can go online to wherever you get your podcasts and look for Alabama Aloud. Thanks for joining us today for In Focus, which itself is a podcast on NPR One or wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Carolyn Hutcheson, and this is listener-supported Troy Public Radio.